Under Moses' leadership, Joshua was shaped to become a great leader. Let's imagine how it all began. Joshua was the son of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim. From a young age, he stood out among his peers for his courage and dedication. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, Joshua was there, witnessing the wonders God performed to free his people. One of Joshua's first major responsibilities arose during the battle against the Amalekites. The people of Israel were being attacked, and Moses needed someone trustworthy to lead the men in battle. He chose Joshua. Imagine the pressure and honor that represented. While Joshua commanded the warriors on the battlefield, Moses, from the top of a hill, raised his hands in prayer to God. And do you know what happened? When Moses kept his hands raised, Israel prevailed. When he lowered them, the enemies advanced. In the end, with God's help and Joshua's leadership, the Israelites won the battle. It was a remarkable moment that showed Moses' trust in Joshua and the importance of faith and obedience. In addition to being a military leader, Joshua was also a dedicated learner. He accompanied Moses during crucial moments. When Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments, Joshua went with him to a certain point of the mountain. Imagine waiting patiently while Moses conversed with God for 40 days and 40 nights. Joshua demonstrated unparalleled patience and loyalty. Another important situation was when Moses descended from the mountain and found the people worshiping the golden calf. Joshua was there, witnessing Moses' sadness and anger at the people's disobedience. This experience must have taught Joshua about the challenges of leadership and the need to remain steadfast in principles. Over time, Joshua became not just an assistant but a confidant of Moses. He learned about the laws, customs, and most importantly, the importance of trusting God in all situations. Moses saw in Joshua a future leader and invested time teaching and guiding him. Then came the mission of the 12 spies. Moses selected a representative from each tribe to explore the land of Canaan, the Promised Land. Joshua was chosen to represent the tribe of Ephraim. For 40 days, they traveled the land, observing its inhabitants, cities, and fruits. Upon returning, 10 of the spies brought discouraging reports, speaking of fortified cities and invincible giants. But Joshua and Caleb had a different stance. With courage and faith, they encouraged the people, saying that with God's help, they could conquer the land. Unfortunately, the people chose to believe the 10 fearful spies. As a result, they were condemned to wander the desert for 40 years. Even so, Joshua remained faithful, continuing to serve under Moses and learning all he could. Throughout these years, Joshua was being prepared. Every battle, every challenge, every lesson alongside Moses served to mold his character. He learned about leadership, faith, obedience, and perseverance. It wasn't just training, it was a process of transformation. Think about how Joshua must have felt watching Moses, such a great leader, face difficulties and still fully trust God. All these experiences prepared Joshua for the moment when he himself would have to take on leadership and guide the people of Israel to the land promised to them. Joshua's preparation under Moses' leadership shows us that great leaders do not emerge overnight. They are shaped through experiences, challenges, and above all, through faith and obedience to God. Joshua was being prepared for a grand mission, and every step taken alongside Moses brought him closer to that purpose. If you're feeling motivated and inspired by this content, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this. We will bring a series of contents with biblical teachings and inspiring stories that motivate us to continue and not give up. Let's proceed with the story. The people of Israel had spent years in the desert after being freed from slavery in Egypt. They were camped on the borders of the Promised Land, Canaan, a land described as where milk and honey flow. There was a mix of expectation and anxiety in the air. Moses, their leader, decided to send 12 men, one from each tribe, to explore the land and bring back information. Among these men were Joshua, from the tribe of Ephraim, and Caleb, from the tribe of Judah. Joshua must have been feeling a whirlwind of emotions. The responsibility was great. The mission was dangerous, but also exciting. They needed to check what the land was like, who its inhabitants were, whether the cities were fortified or open, if the soil was fertile or poor, and even bring back some fruits to show the people. The 12 spies set out in secret. They crossed the borders and entered Canaan. Imagine them walking through vast fields, seeing green hills, flowing rivers, and bustling cities. They observed the crops, vineyards heavy with grapes, fig trees, and pomegranate trees. In a place called the Valley of Escol, They cut a branch with a single cluster of grapes so large it had to be carried by 2 men on a pole. This showed the fertility of the land. But not everything was perfect. As they explored, the spies realized that the inhabitants of Canaan were strong people. They saw large cities with high walls and well-armed soldiers. They encountered the Anakim, descendants of giants, who made the men look like grasshoppers in comparison. This contrast between the land's beauty and the strength of its inhabitants created conflict in the spies' hearts. After 40 days exploring Canaan, the 12 men returned to the Israelite camp. The people gathered anxiously to hear the news. The spies showed the fruits they had brought and confirmed that the land was indeed good. But then, 10 of the spies began to spread a discouraging report. They said, "The land is good, but the peoples who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of giants there. We will not be able to conquer this land." Upon hearing this, the people's hearts filled with fear. Murmurs and complaints began to spread through the crowd. Some even suggested choosing a new leader and returning to Egypt. But in this moment of despair, Joshua and Caleb bravely stood up. Joshua spoke to the people, saying, "The land we have explored is extremely good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will make us enter this land and give it to us. Do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for we will devour them as bread. Their protection has gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid." Imagine the intensity of this moment. On one side, 10 leaders sowing fear and disbelief. On the other, Joshua and Caleb, firm in their faith in God, encouraging the people to trust. Unfortunately, the people chose to believe the 10 fearful spies. The uproar was so great that they even talked about stoning Joshua and Caleb. God was deeply disappointed with the people's lack of faith. As a consequence, He declared that that generation would not enter the promised land. They would wander the desert for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies explored the land, until all the adults of that time had died, except Joshua and Caleb. Consider the weight of this decree. Joshua, despite his faithfulness, would have to wait another 40 years before seeing the promise fulfilled. Even so, he did not lose heart. He continued to serve faithfully, trusting in God's plans. This experience as a spy in Canaan was a test of faith and courage for Joshua. He saw with his own eyes the challenges they would face but chose to focus on God's promise, not the apparent difficulties. He learned that true strength does not lie in the size of the enemies, but in the greatness of God. For us, Joshua's story as a spy teaches us about the importance of trusting God, even when circumstances seem impossible. It shows that faith can give us the courage to face giants and walls, and that disbelief can prevent us from reaching the promises before us. The people of Israel had spent 40 years wandering in the desert due to their lack of faith. Throughout this time, Joshua stood by Moses, learning, observing, and serving faithfully. Moses, the great leader who had led them out of Egypt, was now 120 years old. Although his sight was still clear and his vigor had not diminished, God had told him that he would not enter the promised land because of an act of disobedience. The people were on the banks of the Jordan River, about to enter Canaan. There was a mix of expectation and apprehension. Who would lead this great multitude in the next phase of their journey? Who could take Moses' place, the man who spoke face to face with God? It was then that God called Moses and said, "The time has come for you to rest with your ancestors. Call Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hands on him. Transfer some of your authority to him, so that the whole congregation of the Israelites will obey him." Moses, obeying God's instruction, called Joshua before the entire people. Imagine the scene. Under the scorching desert sun, thousands of people gathered, watching attentively. Moses placed his hands on Joshua, a symbolic gesture of transferring leadership and authority. He declared before all that Joshua would be the new leader, encouraging and strengthening him. Moses said to Joshua, "Be strong and courageous, for you will lead this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to give to their ancestors. The Lord himself will go before you and be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid or discouraged." Consider the weight of these words. Joshua was about to assume leadership of an entire nation, with the responsibility of conquering lands inhabited by strong and established peoples. But he had God's promise and the support of the people. After this ceremony, God spoke directly to Joshua. Imagine the honor and emotion of hearing the voice of the Almighty. God said, "Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead this people to inherit the land I promised their ancestors. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go." These words served as encouragement to Joshua's heart. He knew he was not alone in this mission. He had the assurance that God would be with him every step of the way. Shortly after, Moses ascended Mount Nebo, from where he could see the promised land in the distance. It was there that he died, according to God's will. The people mourned his death for 30 days. Moses left an immense legacy, and replacing him would not be an easy task. With Moses now resting, Joshua fully assumed leadership. The first major task before him was to cross the Jordan River and enter Canaan. But before that, he needed to prepare the people. Joshua called the officers and ordered them to tell the people, "Prepare your provisions, for in 3 days you will cross the Jordan to enter and take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you." The people responded to Joshua with words of support and obedience. "Whatever you command us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in everything, we will also obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses." This declaration must have been encouraging for Joshua. He not only had divine support but also the trust and loyalty of the people. Joshua also sent 2 secret spies to Jericho, the first city they would face. They returned with valuable information, reporting that the people of the land were terrified of the Israelites' arrival because they had heard of the great things God had done for them. With renewed courage, Joshua led the people in crossing the Jordan River. Here, a miracle occurred that confirmed God's hand over him. As soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant touched the waters of the Jordan, the river, which was full due to the harvest season, stopped flowing. The waters piled up upstream, and all of Israel crossed on dry ground. It was a clear sign that God was with Joshua, just as he was with Moses at the Red Sea. After the crossing, God instructed Joshua to set up a memorial with 12 stones taken from the riverbed, one for each tribe of Israel. This would serve so that future generations would remember what God had done for them that day. From that moment on, Joshua's leadership was solidified. The people respected him and recognized that God had chosen him. Joshua continued to lead Israel in various battles and conquests, always seeking divine direction and obeying the instructions he received. The succession of Moses by Joshua shows how God prepares and raises leaders to fulfill his purposes. Joshua was not just a substitute, he was the continuation of God's plan for Israel. His faith, courage, and obedience serve as examples for all of us. This leadership transition also teaches us about trust. The people needed to trust that God was in control, even with Moses' loss. Joshua needed to trust in God's promises to take on such a great responsibility. Above all, it shows that when we follow divine direction, we can face any challenge that comes our way. Do you feel any similarity between the moment you live and the story told? Do you feel you are experiencing something similar? Tell us how you feel. If you need a prayer or help, share a story of overcoming to inspire us and give strength to not give up. Comment if you want to help someone or need help. After 40 years wandering the desert, they were finally at the gates of the Promised Land. Everyone's hearts beat fast with anticipation. Ahead of them, however, was the Jordan River, an apparently insurmountable obstacle. And it wasn't any time of year, it was harvest time, and the Jordan was overflowing, its waters full, and strong currents made the crossing even more challenging. Joshua, now the leader of the people after Moses' death, received instructions from God on how to proceed. He called the camp officials and ordered, "Go through the middle of the camp and instruct the people. Prepare your provisions, for in 3 days you will cross the Jordan to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you." The news spread quickly. Families began packing their belongings, children ran excitedly, and the elderly watched with hopeful eyes. There was a mix of joy and apprehension in the air. After all, they were about to experience one of the greatest events of their lives. Joshua also gave a special order to the Levitical priests: lift up the Ark of the Covenant and go ahead of the people. The Ark represented God's presence among them. It was a sign that they would not be alone on this journey. God would guide them. The next day, very early, the people rose and set out from Shechem, arriving at the banks of the Jordan. There, they camped before crossing. For 3 days, they observed the mighty river. Perhaps some wondered how it would be possible to cross those turbulent waters. But faith kept them steadfast. Then Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." It was a call to spiritual preparation. Everyone should purify themselves, not just physically but also in their hearts, to be ready for what God would do. At the appointed time, Joshua spoke to the priests, "Take the Ark of the Covenant and pass ahead of the people." And so they did. The priests advanced with the Ark, and the people followed, maintaining a respectful distance so that everyone could see the Ark and know the way to follow. God then spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you before all Israel, so they will know that I am with you just as I was with Moses." It was the divine confirmation that Joshua was the chosen leader. Joshua conveyed God's words to the people and gave specific instructions. When the priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant set foot in the waters of the Jordan, the waters will be cut off and piled up. Imagine the scene. The priests walk toward the river, carrying the Ark on their shoulders. The people watch in silence, their eyes fixed on that decisive moment. The Jordan waters flow rapidly, but as soon as the priests' feet touch the river's edge, something surprising happens. The waters coming from above stopped flowing and piled up far away, in the city of Adam, near Zaretan. The waters flowing toward the Dead Sea were completely cut off. The riverbed, which was once covered by turbulent waters, was now dry. A murmur of amazement spread through the crowd. Men, women, and children looked in wonder at the dry riverbed of the Jordan. The priests remained firm in the middle of the river, with the Ark of the Covenant, while all of Israel crossed. Entire families walked where there had once been water. Perhaps some children bent down to touch the dry ground, amazed by the miracle before their eyes. The elderly moved forward cautiously, thanking God for allowing them to see that day. The air was filled with reverence and gratitude. Joshua, following divine instructions, chose 12 men, one from each tribe. He said to them, "Go to the middle of the Jordan, where the priests are, and each take a stone on your shoulder. These stones will serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, 'What do these stones mean?' you will answer, 'The waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the river, the waters were stopped. These stones are to be a memorial forever to the people of Israel." The 12 men did as Joshua ordered. Each took a stone from the middle of the river and carried them to the place where they would camp that night. These stones would be an eternal reminder of God's power and faithfulness. After everyone had crossed, God said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to leave the Jordan." When the priests climbed out of the middle of the river and stepped onto dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and flowed as before, overflowing their banks. The people established camp at Gilgal, on the eastern side of Jericho. There, Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been taken from the Jordan. He said to the people, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents what these stones mean, explain to them that Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as he did with the Red Sea when he dried it before us until we had crossed. He did this so that all the nations of the land would know that the Lord's hand is powerful and that you always fear the Lord your God." The crossing of the Jordan River was more than just a physical passage. It was a clear sign that God was with Joshua, just as he had been with Moses. The people saw with their own eyes that the same God who had parted the Red Sea for their ancestors now opened the Jordan for them. This event strengthened the people's faith and consolidated Joshua's leadership. They were now in enemy territory, but knew they were not alone. God was leading them, and with him, they could face any challenge. For us, the story of crossing the Jordan reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, we can trust God. When he calls us to move forward, he also provides the way. It is a lesson in faith, obedience, and courage. Like the video if you're enjoying it so far, to help YouTube continue recommending videos like this, and it will help and motivate us to continue. We appreciate every second, and may God bless you. The people of Israel had just experienced the miracle of crossing the Jordan River on dry ground. They were finally in the Promised Land, but right ahead stood the imposing walls of Jericho, one of the most fortified cities in Canaan. The walls were so high and thick that many believed it was impossible to cross or knock them down. Joshua, as leader, knew he needed to fully trust God to conquer that city. One night, while near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The man replied, "I am neither for one nor the other. I have now come as commander of the Lord's army." Realizing he was in the presence of a divine messenger, Joshua bowed with his face to the ground in respect and asked, "What message does my Lord have for your servant?" The commander of the Lord's army said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua immediately obeyed. This experience confirmed to Joshua that God was with them and had a specific plan for the conquest of Jericho. God then gave detailed instructions on how they should proceed. And here comes the interesting part: it was not a common military strategy. God said to Joshua, "March around the city, all the men of war, going around it once each day for 6 days. 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. When they hear a long blast on the trumpets, all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the walls of the city will fall down, and the people will go up, everyone straight before them." Imagine the people's reaction upon hearing this strategy. It might sound strange to march around the city blowing trumpets instead of attacking directly. But Joshua and all of Israel decided to faithfully obey God's instructions. On the first day, at dawn, the priests took up the Ark of the Covenant, and 7 priests carrying trumpets of ram's horns went ahead of it. The warriors marched before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed behind the ark, all continuously blowing the trumpets. They circled the city and returned to the camp to spend the night. Now, imagine the inhabitants of Jericho watching from atop the walls. They must have been confused or even intrigued by that silent procession, except for the constant sound of the trumpets. Perhaps they were apprehensive, not understanding what was happening. On the second day, Joshua and the people did the same thing. They marched once around the city and returned to the camp. This was repeated on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th days. During these days, the discipline and obedience of the people were tested. They followed the instructions without questioning, trusting that God knew what he was doing. Then, the 7th day arrived. This day would be different. At dawn, they rose and marched around the city not just once but 7 times. On this day, only, they circled Jericho 7 times. With each circuit, the tension increased. The priests continued blowing the trumpets, and the people remained silent as Joshua had commanded. On the 7th circuit, when the priests blew the long blast on the trumpets, Joshua finally gave the command to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And then, everyone shouted with all their might. Imagine the sound of thousands of voices shouting in unison, combined with the blowing of the trumpets. At that moment, something incredible happened. The walls of Jericho trembled and began to collapse. Stone by stone, the barriers that seemed insurmountable fell before everyone's eyes. The people of Israel advanced directly into the city and captured it. Following God's instructions, they destroyed everything in the city except for Rahab and her family. Rahab was a woman who had helped the Israelite spies before the battle by hiding and protecting them. For her faith and actions, she and her family were spared and integrated into the people of Israel. The victory at Jericho was not the result of military strength or human strategies, but of obedience to God. Joshua and the people followed exactly what God had ordered, and as a result, they witnessed an impressive miracle. After the conquest, Joshua declared that the city should be cursed and that no one should rebuild it. He said, "Cursed before the Lord is the man who tries to rebuild this city of Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest he will set up its gates." The fall of Jericho served as a powerful testimony to all the surrounding nations. It showed that the God of Israel was true and powerful, capable of demolishing the strongest fortifications when his people obeyed him. For us, this story teaches us about the importance of faith and obedience. Often, we may face walls in our lives, obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. But when we trust God and follow his guidance, even if we do not fully understand his plans, we can witness miracles happen. The story of Jericho's fall also highlights the role of a united community in purpose. The entire people of Israel participated, each playing their part, from the priests blowing the trumpets to the warriors marching in silence. Together, they experienced the victory God had promised. After the fall of Jericho, the people of Israel were filled with confidence and gratitude to God. However, they knew the journey was just beginning. The land of Canaan was inhabited by various peoples and fortified cities, each with their own armies and gods. But Joshua and the Israelites had a divine promise that this land would be theirs, and with unwavering faith, they moved forward to fulfill that destiny. Soon after Jericho, Joshua turned his attention to the city of Ai. Initially, they underestimated the enemy. They sent only a few men to fight, but they were surprised and defeated. Joshua was deeply distressed and sought God to understand what had gone wrong. It was then discovered that a man named Achan had disobeyed divine orders by taking forbidden objects in Jericho. After dealing with this sin in the camp and purifying the people, Joshua organized a new strategy. This time, with God's guidance, he devised a cunning plan. He divided his men, preparing an ambush. Some hid behind the city, while another group approached as if they were attacking again. When the men of Ai came out to face them, they pretended to retreat, causing the entire force of Ai to pursue them. At that moment, the hidden group entered the unprotected city and took it. Upon seeing the smoke from the burning city, the Israelites turned against the enemies and defeated them completely. This victory taught the people the importance of obedience and trust in God. As news of Israel's victories spread, the peoples of Canaan became alarmed. Some united to fight against Israel, but the inhabitants of Gibeon chose a different approach. They sent disguised emissaries, wearing worn-out clothes and old sandals, carrying dry and moldy bread. Arriving at Joshua, they said they came from a distant land and asked for an alliance. Without consulting God, Joshua and the leaders made a peace pact with them. Shortly after, they discovered that the Gibeonites were, in fact, nearby neighbors. Although deceived, Joshua honored the agreement but destined the Gibeonites to be servants, woodcutters, and water carriers for the congregation. This episode highlighted the importance of always seeking divine direction before making decisions. When the Amorite kings learned of the alliance between Gibeon and Israel, they joined forces to attack Gibeon. The Gibeonites sent an urgent message to Joshua: "Do not abandon us. Come quickly and save us." Joshua, keeping his word, mobilized his best warriors and marched at night to surprise the enemies. In the heat of battle, God said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have delivered them into your hands. No one of them can withstand you." And so it happened. As the enemies fled, God sent a violent hailstorm, and more died from the hailstones than from the Israelite swords. Realizing he needed more time to complete the victory, Joshua made a bold prayer: "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stopped, and the moon stood still, until the people had avenged their enemies. Never before had there been a day like that when God answered a man's request in such a way. This divine intervention demonstrated God's unconditional support for Israel's mission. After these victories, Joshua led military campaigns throughout the southern region of Canaan. City after city, the Israelites faced their adversaries with courage and determination. God handed cities like Hebron, Debir, Libnah, and many others into Joshua's hands. Each battle consolidated Israel's presence in the Promised Land. The northern kings, seeing Israel's advance, formed an even larger coalition, with armies as numerous as the sand on the beach and many horses and war chariots. But God encouraged Joshua, saying, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will deliver them all into Israel's hands." With this confidence, Joshua launched a surprise attack near the waters of Merom. The victory was overwhelming, and Joshua fulfilled God's orders by disabling the horses and burning the chariots, ensuring they did not rely on military resources but on God. With a large portion of Canaan conquered, it was time to distribute the land among the tribes of Israel. Joshua, along with the high priest Eleazar and the tribe leaders, conducted the casting of lots for the land portions. Each tribe received its inheritance, as promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This distribution was not just an administrative matter, but also a fulfillment of divine promises. Families settled in their lands, cultivated the fields, planted vineyards, and built cities. The vision of an established nation was becoming a reality. Joshua also designated cities of refuge, as instructed by Moses. These cities served as safe places for those who unintentionally caused someone's death, allowing them to escape vengeance until they received a fair trial. Additionally, cities were given to the Levites, the tribe responsible for religious service. Since they did not receive a specific land portion, the Levites were distributed among the other tribes, serving as teachers, priests, and spiritual leaders. This ensured that God's law was taught and practiced throughout the nation. After years of battles and challenges, the biblical text tells us that the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord granted them rest on every side, just as he had promised their ancestors. None of their enemies could resist them, for the Lord delivered them all into their hands. Of all the good promises the Lord made to the nation of Israel, none of them failed. Every one was fulfilled. This period was marked by peace and prosperity. People could finally enjoy the fruits of their labor, celebrate festivals, teach their children, and live in community. Now elderly, Joshua called all of Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials. He reminded the people of all that God had done for them, from the exodus from Egypt to the recent conquests. He warned them about the importance of remaining faithful to God, avoiding foreign gods and the practices of neighboring nations. In a powerful speech, Joshua declared, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord is not your desire, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The people responded in unison, affirming their commitment to serve God. Joshua then established a covenant with the people that day, reaffirming God's statutes and decrees. Joshua died at the age of 110 years, being buried in the land of his inheritance. His leadership was crucial for the establishment of Israel in Canaan. He left a legacy of faith, courage, and obedience. Throughout his life, Joshua demonstrated that when we trust God and follow his ways, even the most difficult challenges can be overcome. The conquest of the Promised Land was not just a series of battles, but a journey of faith and trust in divine promises. Joshua and the people of Israel show us that with determination and faithfulness, we can achieve the purposes God has for us. After many years leading Israel, conquering cities, and establishing the tribes in the Promised Land, Joshua was advanced in age. Feeling that his days were coming to an end, he wished to leave a lasting message for the people he loved so much. Joshua knew that despite the conquests, the greatest challenge was still to keep the people's hearts faithful to God. To do this, Joshua called all the tribes of Israel to gather in Shechem, a place filled with history and significance. It was there that God had promised Abraham he would give that land to his descendants. Imagine the scene: thousands of men, women, and children gathered in a wide valley, surrounded by mountains, with an expectant silence as they awaited their leader's words. Joshua stood before the crowd, his figure marked by time, but his eyes shining with the same determination as when he took leadership after Moses. His voice echoed through the valley as he began to speak. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: A long time ago your ancestors, including Terah, father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I brought Abraham out of that land and led him throughout the land of Canaan. I multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac." Joshua then recounted the history of the people, reminding them how God had guided and protected Israel over the centuries. He spoke about how God sent Moses and Aaron to free them from slavery in Egypt, how he parted the Red Sea for their escape from the Egyptians, and how he sustained them in the desert for 40 years. He recalled the battles they faced against powerful peoples, like the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, and many others. "It was not by your sword or your bow that you conquered these lands," Joshua said. "It was by the powerful hand of God that all this was possible." As Joshua spoke, the people reflected on all they had lived through. Every victory, every challenge overcome, every miracle witnessed. It was a journey that took them from slaves to a settled nation in their own land. Then, Joshua paused and looked deeply into the crowd. His voice became firmer and filled with passion. "Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Put away the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord is not your desire, choose today whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." He knew that some still held hidden idols, relics from past times, or influences from surrounding nations. Joshua wanted the people to understand that faithfulness to God was essential for their future. Then he issued a challenge that would echo through the ages. "But if serving the Lord is not your desire, choose today whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." These words resonated deeply in the hearts of the people. Joshua was not just speaking as a leader, but as a man who had dedicated his entire life to serving God. He was presenting a clear and urgent choice before them. The people responded in unison, their voices filled with conviction. "Far be it from us to abandon the Lord to serve other gods. The Lord our God is the one who brought us and our parents out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and who performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us along all the way we traveled and among all the nations through which we passed. We will also serve the Lord, because he is our God." However, Joshua warned them, "You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your detestable sins. But the people insisted, "No. We will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said, "You yourselves have shown that you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord." "And we are witnesses," they replied. "Now then," Joshua said, "throw away the foreign gods that are among you and get rid of the detestable things you have set your hearts on. Serve the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people affirmed, "We will serve the Lord, our God, and obey his voice." In response to this solemn declaration, Joshua established a covenant with the people that day in Shechem. He recorded these words in the book of the law of God. To seal this moment, he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the sanctuary of the Lord. He said, "See, this stone is to be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has spoken to us. It will be a witness against you if you turn away from the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt." This stone served as a physical and permanent reminder of the commitment they had made. Every time someone passed by, they would remember the covenant made that day. After this, Joshua dismissed the people, sending each to their inheritance in the land. There was a sense of renewal and purpose. Families returned to their homes with hearts full of determination to serve God and teach their children the ways of the Lord. Joshua lived a little longer after this, but his final speech left an indelible mark on Israel's history. He died at the age of 110 years and was buried in Timnath-Serah, in the mountainous region of Ephraim. That entire generation served the Lord during Joshua's life, and that of the elders who survived him and who had experienced all the works the Lord had done for Israel. The renewal of the covenant in Shechem was more than just an agreement. It was a collective commitment of heart and soul. Joshua wanted to ensure that the people not only inhabited the promised land, but also lived according to God's precepts, ensuring blessings for future generations. This story teaches us about the importance of remembering and recognizing the works God has done in our lives. It challenges us to choose daily whom we will serve. And it reminds us that our commitment to God must be sincere and reflected in our actions. From a young age, Joshua was chosen to be Moses' aide. He was always by the great leader's side, learning and observing. Imagine being close to someone who spoke directly with God. This experience prepared Joshua for greater challenges in the future. Did you know that Joshua was one of the 12 spies sent by Moses to explore the land of Canaan? While most returned in fear, saying the inhabitants were invincible giants, Joshua and Caleb had faith. They believed that with God's help, they could conquer the promised land. After Moses' death, God chose Joshua to lead the people of Israel. It must have been an enormous responsibility, right? But God encouraged Joshua, saying, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for I will be with you wherever you go." One of Joshua's first great challenges as leader was crossing the Jordan River. And guess what? Just as the Red Sea parted for Moses, the waters of the Jordan stopped when the priests touched them with the Ark of the Covenant. The entire people crossed on dry ground. Can you imagine the emotion of that moment? Then came the famous Fall of Jericho. Instead of using brute force, Joshua followed God's instructions. The people marched around the city for 6 days. On the 7th day, after the 7th circuit, they blew the trumpets and shouted. The walls simply collapsed. It was a victory that showed obedience to God brings incredible results. Under Joshua's leadership, Israel conquered much of the land of Canaan. Each tribe received its portion, and the dream of inhabiting the promised land became a reality. At the end of his life, Joshua gathered all the people. He reminded them of the wonders God had done and encouraged them to remain faithful. His words were powerful. "Choose today whom you will serve. I and my household will serve the Lord." Joshua's story shows us how faith, courage, and obedience can lead us to accomplish great deeds. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the life of this inspiring leader. Joshua's story is a journey of faith, courage, and obedience that spans generations. From his early days as Moses' assistant to his final speech in Shechem, Joshua demonstrated unwavering commitment to God and the people he led. His life offers us valuable lessons that remain relevant today. Joshua shows us that true leadership arises from humility and service. He did not seek positions of prominence but was faithful in small tasks, quietly preparing for the great challenges to come. When the time came to succeed Moses, he was ready because he had learned to trust God in all situations. Crossing the Jordan River teaches us that insurmountable obstacles can be overcome when we follow divine instructions. Even facing a swollen river, Joshua led the people with confidence, knowing that God would fulfill his promises. This encourages us to face our own challenges with faith, believing that we are not alone. The Fall of Jericho is a powerful reminder that we do not always understand God's plans, but obedience brings extraordinary results. Marching around a city while blowing trumpets might not seem like a logical strategy, but it was exactly what led to victory. This challenges us to trust God, even when His ways do not make sense to us. In the conquest of the Promised Land, we see how perseverance and unity can turn dreams into reality. Joshua led the people through countless battles, always seeking God's guidance and keeping focus on the greater goal. His dedication resulted in the establishment of a prosperous and united nation. Finally, the final speech and the renewal of the covenant in Shechem are calls to reflection and commitment. Joshua knew that true success was not just in conquering lands, but in maintaining a genuine relationship with God. He challenged the people to choose whom they would serve, emphasizing that this decision would shape their future. Now, as we look at Joshua's life, we are inspired to do the same. Each of us faces walls of Jericho in our lives, challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But Joshua's story reminds us that with faith, courage, and obedience, we can tear down these barriers. We are invited to reflect on our own journeys. Are we willing to trust God even when the path is uncertain? Are we ready to lead with integrity and serve others? Just like Joshua and the people of Israel, we have choices to make that will determine the course of our lives. May Joshua's story encourage us to be strong and courageous, not to stray from the principles we know are true. May we be able to say with conviction, "I and my household will serve the Lord." And by doing so, we will see that, regardless of the challenges we face, God is faithful to guide us, protect us, and fulfill the promises in our lives. Joshua's journey ends, but the lessons he left us remain alive. It is up to us to apply them in our daily lives, inspiring those around us and building a legacy that will endure for generations. Thank you for watching until here, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you can see more content like this and inspiring, motivating, and interesting stories of overcoming. Until next time.